First of all, apologies for the fairly late start. Some of our panel found that London traffic is every bit as bad as it is purported to be. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ian King. I'm the business presenter on Sky News. The title of this session is High Street versus Cyber Street. Can retailers thrive in a digital world? Well, we've got four very good brains to help you guide you through this particular minefield. On my far left is Michael Ward. He's Managing Director of Harrods. Next to me is Scott Malkin. He's founder and chairman of SD Malkin Properties. On my right, Ajay Chowdhury from BGC. He's partner and managing director. And on my far right is Bonin Bough. Sorry, Bonin. There used to be a presenter on British television called Frank Bough, and Bonin tells me every time he comes to London, people always pronounce his surname Bough. Sorry, for the non-Brits, that's gone right over your head. And Bonin works for Mondelēz, where he's in charge of e-commerce. What I'm going to do is ask each of our panelists to kick us off with a couple of minutes each on where they see this debate. And I'm going to ask Ajay to be so kind as to kick us off.
Sure. So I'm a partner in BCG Digital Ventures, but prior to that, I was an entrepreneur. Still am an entrepreneur. And I founded a company called Shazam and a company called Comkey. Comkey was actually a retail technology company, and what we were trying to do was work with retailers like H&M, Victoria's Secret, Toys R Us, McDonald's, to help them connect their offline and online businesses. And in particular, what we're trying to help them do was identify individuals who came into their store, because if you take Amazon, Amazon knows exactly who you are and can make recommendations to you based on your shopping history, whereas large high street retailers were more mass market. It was very hard to identify people. And they loved our technology. We put it in around the world to a number of these companies. But what was very interesting, when push came to shove, they were not organized to do things the way they need to do things. So they were very much siloed. So essentially, the merchandising people didn't really talk to the IT people, who didn't speak to the store operations people. And one of the biggest challenges they found, that as they wanted to move into the e-commerce world and the technology world, you've got to be transversal and cut across all of this. Because from a customer perspective, they don't see the store in the way that you see the store. And that was one of the biggest challenges they had. So although they put our technologies in, they found they couldn't get the benefits because of the way that they were organized. And that's a theme that might be useful for me to come back to a bit later on.
Thanks, Ajay. Bonin, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So Bonin Bough, I am Chief Media and E-commerce Officer for Mondelēz International. So we are the largest snack food company in the world. We own Cadbury, we own Nabisco, so Oreo. I think that what you said was specifically right, which is, Ajay, I think one of the hardest things for traditional organizations to figure out is how to reorganize themselves for a growing digital consumer. But at the same time, I think we all talk about new startups and how do you build the next unicorns, these billion-dollar, fast-growing businesses. And I actually think that the newest unicorns, or I think McKinsey just wrote an article saying, who needs unicorns when you have dragons? The scale of our organizations can allow us to actually grow faster growing businesses. And so in September, we announced our goal to build a billion-dollar e-commerce business. So I run our media investments, so TV, print, digital, and now building our e-com. But I think that big organizations actually have the right to win, because at our scale, we can do things at a pace that nobody else can. And so the big challenge will be, are we able to reorganize ourselves? And I think the biggest piece is, how much is senior leadership willing to invest in kind of those challenges? And then the last piece, I think, is you have to bring legacy. The hardest thing is not organizing the actual assets that the organization has, it's the mindset. So how do we get a digital mindset? So I continue to tell our organization that we're not just building another channel with e-commerce, we're actually building a technology business that just happens to sell Cadbury chocolate bars. And if we can get our mindset there, then I think we can actually really take advantage of scale and pace and growth.
Thanks, Bonin. Scott?
Sure, I serve as chairman of Value Retail. We build and operate high-end shopping villages focused on outlet shopping and therefore international tourism. One that is closest to us here is in London is Bicester Village up in Oxfordshire near off the M40. We have 9 in Western Europe, 2 in China. And our focus is very much on the long haul consumer, which links closely to the notion of experiential shopping. Our vision is that the world has already polarized between efficiency, increasingly defined by the internet, and experience. And the nature of experience, in our view, is rapidly evolving, becoming more costly and more complicated to deliver. With the transparency of the internet, the consumer has ever better awareness and ever higher expectations. So for those who are lucky enough to be able to embrace that consumer, Michael is one, the future looks complex but positive, and we happily fit in that bucket as well.
All right, Michael.
I find the debate quite strange. 10 years ago, I remember doing an investment thesis for an investment we were making of buying out a public company. And it was based upon purely the fact that we could fragment back this 5th largest grocery retailer in the UK back onto the high street and let the internet take over the bulk. Now, 10 years later, and some of those stores not really quite getting used to it, we're still having the debate. So as a general question, of course, there are going to be casualties. But within all of this, it's about how you position yourself for success. And I think we unbelievably overcomplicate all of this. It's relatively straightforward. If we think we have a product which we want to sell to a consumer in a way that no one else is doing it. I think the real key for me is how do we do it profitably? At the end of the day, the internet has defied 3 of the basic tenets for me. I have a young daughter who buys 50% of her product which is returned. She's not penalised for that. She buys it from companies who have van routes which are unscheduled. She's not penalised for that. And then it's worse because she does it in mid-season. So when she buys in December, it's great because she most probably buys more, sends more back. And it probably, if she takes it back to the Waitrose, which is not particularly used to handling apparel over a Christmas period, if it gets back to a store by February, they're lucky, at which point it's worth about 15% of what they actually paid for it. So I think the challenges for me is we've got lots of things we can go in the consumer, but I think we've also got to think about the propositions. I mean, for us, we have a very strong and growing internet business, but we've got a core business which is based on theatre, experience, product, and uniqueness. And those two can cohabit. I wouldn't like to be a mass marketer on the high street, particularly in areas like Coventry or all of the other secondary cities. So I suppose that's our little sort of story.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to pick up on something you said there. I mean, the point about your daughter is quite interesting. And I guess it speaks almost to the way that online businesses, online retailers, and one in particular that we can all think of, are indulged by their shareholders in a way that a lot of other traditional bricks and mortar retailers are not. Is ownership structure a factor here, do you think?
I just thought people are thinking about it as much. I mean, you're just looking at some of the supply chain issues that people have got and not being charged for it at all. And thinking it's a long-term business proposition. I mean, I'd hate to look at the fully costed models, and I don't think anybody fully costs them, of I'm going to spend 100 million on a new IT system, and by the way, it's going to then produce a distribution chain which is probably going to add 5 to 10% more onto my cost before putting 10 or 15% paid advertising if you're in certain categories. This is a really difficult game to make profit. Now, if you're a pure play with no other, it's a lot easier. So if you're an ASOS, yes, it's good. But even there, you get to the cost of your acquisition of your customer is greater than the lifetime value of your customer. So I think there's 2 ways. One, it's always great for us because if people were running these things very efficiently, it'd be a lot tougher. But there's a lot of hardship there on the internet companies. I'd much rather be fighting against somebody who are already fighting within themselves than fighting somebody who's a lean, fit machine.
Yeah. Ajay, what do you make of what you thought?
I think there's some interesting challenges here. I mean, I read a wonderful description of Amazon the other day where it was described as a charity funded by its shareholders on the behalf of its consumers. Because I think Amazon has very rarely made a profit. But what's very interesting about Amazon, the reason it's got the market cap it has, is not just because of its dominance in retail, but because it's blurring the line now between what is retail and what is a media company. So just as Uber started off as a taxi company, but it's now beginning to get into deliveries and beginning to get a whole bunch of other things, I think the interesting challenges that retailers have is that a lot of these online companies coming on are not just eating away at their businesses, but they're basically saying, once I've got a captive audience, what else can I do with that audience? And the fact that Amazon is now funding, paying hundreds of millions for Top Gear, it shows that they're beginning to rethink what they are, and that's no longer just a retailer. And I think you're going to find a lot of other companies doing that. And a lot of traditional retail companies, in addition to how they organize themselves, are going to have to think about what portfolio bets are we going to have to take in some of these other areas to avoid us being disrupted by some of these new companies coming up.
I think that's so first of all, profitability is one of the hardest things, and it's really difficult to build a profitable business inside of a already existing working mass producer, because at the end of the day, we're going to one thing, which is how do we deliver bigger lots at a cheaper price, when the consumer is saying, or Amazon, for example, Amazon wants us to deliver within 2 days. And so the strain that puts on the supply chain, and to that point, the capital cost that it's going to cost to get there. The challenge is if you don't, then what? So if you look at, in China, there's a company called Three Squirrels. So Three Squirrels, all they do is they sell different packages of nuts. And all they do is they sell on Alibaba. That's it. And in 3 years, they went to a $300 million business. Now, before, we used to be able to see competitors come that way and stop them because we owned the relationship with the distribution channel. But now, in absence of being able to stop distribution, there will be a 3 cookies, there will be a 3 chocolate, there will be a 3 gum. How do we compete against that? And so that's what I think the challenge for us is. We can't just shove more Oreo cookies down the same pipe at the end, or down a different pipe, and hope that we win there, because the businesses do have different economics. So what are the new advantage portfolio that we have to build in order to compete in this marketplace? So so I think there's 2 pieces that companies now have the hard time of. Amazon wants we want every single thing that you sell. So we have to deliver our existing assortment, but at the same time we have to run towards the future and build what are our versions of Snackbox or Nourish or delivery replenishment. So I think it was said wisely, which is this is a really, really hard business. And I'll tell you, the last 9 months of my life have been the hardest in my entire life, because you're battling moving an existing organization and trying to figure out how do you deliver your next Uber solution, for example.
Yeah, Scott, what do you make of the supply chain differences between traditional retailers and the new wave of e-commerce retailers?
I think what's fascinating is this really takes one to a reevaluation and a recalculation of what is the worth of a brand, and what is a brand, and how much of what is happening turns out to be defined traditionally. We thought of it as a brand, but it turns out to be a commodity, and the delivery mechanism created branding. So if you're a rock star and you're playing at Emirates Stadium, why will people associate your identity, your music, your brand with a person, with an experience, rather than being able to stream the music? Oreos, what makes them distinctive globally when they can be forced, because that's what Amazon's doing, towards a commoditized delivery. And I think that means that we go back to notions of experience as associated with brand, and the cost of, or the opportunity to perform to 60,000 people is more important about differentiating oneself. In fact, if you look at music, concerts, stadium concerts are gradually filtering away, and it's festivals, and the whole notion is diffused, and therefore the profitability becomes more challenging. So I think that, bizarrely, supply chains were always about efficiency, but there wasn't necessarily the transparency or the pressure to make them as productive as they could be, and technology allows them to become only more precise. The value created through brand identity experience has to be the path forward, and the skills associated with that typically, as we're saying, are at odds with the delivery and infrastructure of delivery mechanisms and infrastructure of existing companies. And that's why perhaps a Warby Parker and Ace and Tate could accelerate quickly, faster than a traditional manufacturer and distributor of eyeglass frames, because they're not burdened by the history. Doesn't mean they won't have stores. It does mean they'll start with a completely different operating premise, and they won't have to convert an existing culture.
What did you make of Ajay's point that Amazon is somewhat indulged by its shareholders?
Oh, I think Amazon is one of the great amusing business stories. It's revolutionary, it's fascinating, and I think there's a very good argument for the fact that it will never make money from retail. It's very difficult, as Michael said, to make money multi-brand distribution in retail traditionally, and now with these greater efficiencies, the rates of return. I've got a daughter who's who lives around the corner from a drugstore. If she wants to buy toothpaste, she orders it on Amazon Prime, free delivery. The $2 tube of toothpaste, whatever, is waiting at her door when she gets home. And it doesn't, they can't make money on that model. And the thing is, they're going to be so central and they'll be ubiquitous, and then they'll be regulated like a utility. The government won't let them jack up their pricing, which is what they'll want to do. So they'll have to make their money through other things, the cloud, the data they may possess. That has to be their future, which means that their profitability will always be much lower than I would believe people assume.
Crikey.
But Amazon, I can't see Amazon being regulated at all. I mean, that's an outrageous thought that after, they're very highly successful retailer.
You're talking about the city of London just decided they're going to regulate Uber, right? France is saying they can't have Uber. Government can do what the population wants it to do. I'm not pro or anti-Amazon. What I'm saying is, if Amazon in practice wipes out most of traditional high street retail, which is what's happening, if it guts it, it will be seen as the reason that they are the only option, and then they will be treated like a utility. When you used to have landline phones, heat, I mean, these are going to become standard issues. If you cannot buy toothpaste in most of the UK,
but you can go to Boots, you can go to Tesco's.
today,
Today you can.
5 years out, 5 years out, the landscape is going to look very different.
I think we need to put it into context. I think if you take online, and you made only, I think online is about only 5% of total retail sales. Now, by category, it's different. So if you take music, which was obviously and books, which were kind of at the end of it, it's far, far, far higher. But overall, it's still only about 5%. So it's not like traditional retail's dying anytime soon. But I think the interesting is when you look category by category, that's where I think you'll start seeing a lot of these issues emerging. And what do the books and music guys do? They have very little choice now, which is why almost most of the music shops have gone out of business.
But that's why I think we need to be more scared than what you painted, to be perfectly honest with you, because I think when we use the word online, I think we think of the internet and we think of the traditional Amazon shopping experience and how long it's taken for Amazon to grow. But I think what we're looking at now is a new consumer, which is a mobile consumer. And that mobile consumer now can experience retail whenever they want. Their mom is at a soccer game watching her kid and now buying. Before, it was actually relatively inconvenient to buy. And so that's why you're seeing companies like Uber explode so fast. And so I'm a lot more nervous than you are about what the true future of retail is. If you look at a company like Alibaba, so Alibaba, largest retailer on the face of the planet, they own no stores. You go to their campus, it's a city, and it's just 22-year-olds. They don't look anything like any retailer that we've ever seen before. And these guys are running the world. And more importantly is, 80% of the purchases that are made, and most of them are in tier 4, tier 5 cities in China, are done on a mobile phone. And I don't just see Alibaba in China, I see India, Brazil. That is a very scary future where they're going to be on every single college campus by 2016, which means that a new consumer might never set foot in a store ever again.
That is correct.
So I think
Michael,
it's a
you
little
wanted to
scary.
come in.
Sorry.
There's 2 or 3 things. One of this is, the first of which is anyone who has got a high street presence in the middle ground, small movements of share across categories kill you because your cost base isn't coming down. So your tail grows every year. So the worst thing you can have is a 3% growth in the online, which isn't matched by a 3% growth in the market. It strangles you. And then the tail kills the business that's actually operating it. So these are small movements within it. And at the same time, you're operating in a marketplace, and I'm talking mid-market. Unless you can differentiate yourself, then why do you look at ASOS versus a fashion chain? The economics will destroy the high street fashion chain. And once that starts, my kids now hardly ever go to the high street. What do? They buy online all of the time. So these generations are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Ask her whether or not when she wants to buy a Chanel bag, where she wants to go. Never goes online. Daddy, I'm coming to your store.
Do you think these moves here?
Not because it's my store. But she wants the
staff
experience.
discount, Michael? Yeah.
There's no staff discount on Chanel, trust me. But she wants unique products that she can't find anywhere else. She wants to be able to walk in there and have choice, which she won't have anywhere else. And she wants to get the most unbelievable service in the most amazing atmosphere. And if you can niche it, then you can do it.
So your point is, millennials, even though we're sort of perhaps saying, crikey, they're unlike any other type of customer, And Bonin, you were saying something about the people who work for Alibaba. They're actually like every other customer at the end of the day.
In small niches of the market.
So I'd argue that's true to a point, and that in fact what we're seeing, first of all, there are no, shopping's all about women, firstly. Women drive the equation. Secondly, there are no pure online or pure store-based people. I don't think we will end up with a generation that only shops online. They will look for experience. They will look, whether it's niche or concepts of experience. But today, already, the same woman will buy a replacement for that bag, exact bag. She will buy online, and she will go to the store for experience. She'll go for online for 24-hour delivery because she wants it for a certain occasion. So it's already fragmented, and really what we're talking about, and this is Bonin's point, I think, a shift of power away from the producer, away from the delivery chain to the consumer. The consumer has all these rights that didn't used to exist, 50% return rate. I'll buy 6 in different colors and sizes and keep 1 or none as a consumer. No penalties for that. The mechanisms might need to shift, but the consumer is king in a way that hasn't been true for hundreds of years.
But it also doesn't stop. I mean, we have 82% of our sales are recorded in our rewards cards. So we've got as much data as an internet company. So we can actually mine and model our company exactly the same way as we can an internet company. We've just made it and structured ourselves, we can do it. Now, our publishing business, which we feed off our rewards program, our magazine is ABC accredited ahead of Harper's and Tatler. So you can actually do all of these things. But to your point, you've got to think about where you're actually going to drive. There's additional forms, not of revenue, but engagement with customer.
That's one of the reasons. So I run our media as well as e-com, and that's one of the reasons why we brought them together. And I think what you said is interesting. And it's not just Amazon, it's Alibaba. All these guys are now becoming media and engagement companies. And I think brands have to think about what you said earlier, which is we're no longer going to be able to sell this commodity that we used to sell. Oreo has to have something bigger that it's bringing to the world, whether it is as simple as T-shirts or a larger experience that Oreo needs to be able to monetize over time. Because if we're reliant on just that cookie alone, it's going to be hard to maintain the consumer expectation and consumption behaviors.
But even the way they engage, I think the Oreos, if I recall, during the blackout, you had that brilliant tweet about Dunk in the Dark or something like that, which got completely viral. Yep. But the other interesting thing to me is, what is the role of the actual retail store here? So if you take Apple, Apple is selling incredibly high-end products, the equivalent of the Chanel handbag, for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the retail store is just a showroom. I mean, ultimately, they want to fulfill online because that's where the economics lie. So they're using their retail stores in a very different way from a lot of other people are using it. And I think that's actually quite intriguing as well. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Amazon decided to buy a chain of retail stores to become showrooms for the online service.
Well, they'll have to. I'll argue that they'll have to. They'll have no
I
choice.
think you may be right.
But Regent Street is the highest density store in the whole of the United Kingdom.
Sure.
So it's a bloody good showroom.
But they don't like, but they don't like the queues outside anymore. They're trying to stop the queues. They're trying to push people online to buy online.
They are. It's still growing at double digits as the biggest retail store in London.
So
it's a very good showroom.
So the store becomes, so you use the word showroom, I would say the store is the theater, right? And the brand is defined by the theatrical experience, if you like. And so how do we create a store? I mean, M&M's have a store. Does it really work? I don't know. Rolex has a store. Will Oreos have a store? They'll have to, right? But then the standard of expectations is where it gets complicated. So Disney has had stores. Disney is in the business of communicating and delivering magic. I actually saw the eyes of my 6-year-old widen when she saw a Disney character approach her. It really was a miraculous thing. It's what they show on TV and you say, that's nice, it's contrived. It actually happens. But how do you do that in a Disney store? It turns out they haven't figured it out, right? And the Disney store as a theatrical experience can't match what they can do with animation and on stage and on ice.
Scott, why is the Warby Parker store such a success story? The brick and mortar Warby Parker store. They obviously made the transition the other direction, and they're doing more per square foot than Tiffany. So what's the...
I think that generally speaking, going from the online culture to the physical culture is much easier. Michael has the power of a showman in the store that he runs. Most retail distributed in stores is through a machinery that fundamentally is commoditized in order to deliver consistency and efficiency. So Harrods was already a beacon of theater and entertainment. And generally speaking, I would suggest one could look at the example of Steve Jobs, whose genius on retail was that he had a vision, he designed it with great specificity, and then hired a retailer, Ron Johnson, to execute his vision. And everybody, including Ron Johnson, tended to forget that this was Steve's vision, and it had nothing to do with traditional retail. Normal people, Microsoft, whoever, hire a retailer and say, we need a store, Disney, we need a store, create one for us, you're a retailer. And the Warby Parker vision, the Apple Store vision is really about a concept of retail that is not rolling forward what we're used to, but starting new and starting with the consumer. Steve Jobs used to say, I don't ask my consumers what they want because they can't picture what will generate for them. Henry Ford once said, I don't ask my customers what they want because they'd ask for a faster horse. Where Warby Parker resonates in a number of ways: authenticity, creativity, stylishness, youthfulness, but not trendiness, youthfulness of spirit rather than ASOS, youthfulness of age, and they, which is what Michael and Mary Gay and Harrods always did, they talked about educating the consumer. You're talking to the consumer and building a relationship with the consumer, not just moving product. And I think, and Warby Parker stores, by the way, are typically, they're upstairs on Marlborough Street in Boston, but they're upstairs, they're small, they're not loaded with back of house. The sales staff are trained with a different vision, selected for a different purpose. It's more in common with a restaurant than there is with a traditional retail store. And by the way, we will go all sorts of bizarre and strange venues for restaurants if the food is superb and the service is great. It doesn't have to be expensive in terms of the setting or the rent. So that's an attempt at an answer.
I think there is another aspect for Warby Parker which is important, which will cut across all of this, which is personalization. So I think one of the things they're trying to push very hard is also a personalized product and a personalized service for you. So bringing that Amazon personalization into the real world. And I think that's another issue that a lot of retailers are struggling with because they're used to dealing with mass markets. They're not used to dealing with me specifically and what I want specifically. So again, when we were working with H&M in our tech companies, we had some really interesting technology where using the mobile phone, you could identify who the person was, where they were in your store, and you could make them personalized offers in the store to try and bridge that gap. Again, it didn't work because they just couldn't organize to do it. But how retailers begin to personalize is going to be another big issue for the future.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned that you felt some traditional retailers had looked at e-commerce as being over there. They didn't want to get involved in it. There were divisions, internal divisions. Do you foresee tech companies and e-commerce companies having similar problems if they do try and establish a physical presence?
Almost certainly. I'll give you the best example of the traditional retailers. I was talking to the CEO of HMV when HMV existed. This was 8-10 years ago. And they were setting up their e-commerce business. And he said, well, I'm going to have my e-commerce business report into my stores business. And I said, why? And he said, well, I don't want it to cannibalize too much so the head of stores can manage the cannibalization, which was completely the worst way to go. Because that's exactly the point. You have to let it cannibalize and figure out how do we make money on it. So I absolutely think traditional e-commerce companies trying to get into retail will find it very difficult too.
What do you think the problems that they're going to encounter then?
Managing property. I mean, that's one, retail is a property business in a lot of ways, and depending on how big you want to be, you end up having a fixed cost. And I think the point you were making is very well made, that if you have a slight downturn, you've got all these fixed costs you can't do anything about. So that's one huge issue that they're going to have. The second issue is then, how do you actually then manage, depending how big their retail footprint is, actual shop assistants, people in the store? It's a very different business. It's a very different business.
Michael, you've obviously built an e-commerce business on the back of a traditional retail business. How did you avoid this cannibalization issue that Ajay mentions?
Well, the customer's going to decide. Yeah. So it's really quite simple. If they want to do it one way, they'll do it one way. So I'm not going to try and force them in any different way. I'm not going to incentivize them in a different way. I'm just going to provide them with the same thing in two different areas and let them choose. Now, and anyone who thinks they can manipulate consumer behavior is really kidding themselves. And the train has left the station on this. So for us, The key for us was not actually how you control the web, which was relatively straightforward. It was how do you up your game in the store to make sure that your like-for-like growth in the store continued. And therefore, you had to run those two in parallel. But to Scott's point, that was we had to get more unique product. We had to go really upmarket in our areas. The new areas that we've built have created new categories. We've done a salon de parfum with personalized perfumes, with the rare perfumes, the proper ouds. So we really went into niches and started to earn them. But we can do it because we're in the luxury high-end market servicing the top 0.1% of the population. In the middle ground, it's going to be carnage.
So I agree with that. I would just make two comments about what Ajay and Michael said. Luxury, one can move across towards the word fashion. The reality is that things that are fashionable have an appeal and link comfortably with experience. And it isn't coincidental that Angela Ahrendts is running retail for Burberry. She comes from fashion, not retail. And I would argue that it is hard, retail's hard, but there are solutions. The point about personalization, I would suggest there's a related word that's also interesting, customization. I actually think that one of the things that works for Warby Parker and what I'll call the new age of retail, and Michael's words are absolutely right, the customer decides. Customization, the ability for the consumer to feel engaged with the process of defining, deciding, creating. It's all fine and good to get pinged on your smartphone more or less every 30 seconds with some personalized offer. But that's not the same thing as taking the initiative, in essence being invited to take the initiative, to customize, define, and create something where you as an individual feel you have ownership. And I think that's really the holy grail of where retail experience is headed.
Okay, Bonin.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to talk about customization. So I think what you said earlier, going back to many of these companies are starting with understanding where the new customer is. So Warby Parker, I think Bonobos is a great example of understanding where the new customer is and building retail around it. And I think we did a little experiment at South by Southwest where we launched an Oreo 3D printer. So it printed Oreos based on what was trending on Twitter. And I've never seen anything like this. People stood online. You could go up and custom choose your, your trend. People stood online for 2.5 hours waiting to print their custom Oreo cookie. And that moment, we realized that this customization and the consumer being able to be a part of creating that. And so our challenge is now, how do you create mass custom? How do you do that on mass? And the beautiful thing about the e-com channel is it actually allows us to rebuild a business around mass custom. We could never do that in store. So there's actually something so unique that we can take our core brand and do something really interesting online that ties to this new customer and what their expectations are. And so I think you're going to see more and more of those kind of differentiated offerings in the e-com space from mass companies like us. Now, it's not easy, but it also allows premium. It gives us kind of our upscale. It's our Harrods version of Oreo.
Are there any segments of retailing that where you think this idea of personalisation might not be applicable, or where it's going to be harder?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think at a certain level it's going to affect all bits of retailing. Now, mass media, I suppose, is somewhat different. I mean, so if you're seeing a movie, you're not going to see, The Martian made specially for you. But on the other hand, you do want to kind of receive it typically when you want it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the one thing, that, just as a complete aside, the one retail area I'm completely amused by is the whole idea of windowing in media, where, after movie shows in cinemas, it's the only product I can think of that I cannot get for 3 months now, unless I get it illegally. But those kind of things are also going to disappear very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm. But Netflix and Amazon are already kind of...
No, but there's still a gap. So after the movie shows, you can't see it on Netflix or Amazon for
No, I mean,
period.
Netflix are creating originals that they're just releasing all...
Indeed. But it's the traditional
to
studios.
paraphrase Groucho Marx, customization is the only thing. And if you can commoditize customization, you've got it made.
But let's not sort of go back to this, because the more that you start to customize, the only way you can get away with it is charging a premium price for it.
Yep.
And therefore, what we're again going back to the education on the web. Everybody's educated on the web to go in the search engine and find the cheapest polo shirt. Where do people use it? They don't use it for finding a lot of customized product. They're genuinely searching for price. So the two are actually fighting against each other. So from our perspective is you create the uniqueness, you create the experience, you create the brand, then you can charge the premium for it. The customer is really bright. Don't deliver on any one of those constituents and he kills you. You know, if you look at the high street, you've got some real successes. Why does Ted Baker win? He's got the most fantastic fabrics, he's got great service, great stock, and staff that are trained like hell. He sells a similar product to 10 other retailers who are in the pits. Because what he's done, he does it absolutely outstandingly well on every level. Retailers in general do not. The high street is unfortunately driven downwards on margins, on costs, on service.
But I mean, on that point, I mean, notwithstanding Scott's anecdote about how his daughter buys toothpaste, if I'm a traditional retailer and I can match you as an e-commerce retailer on price, what is the other edge that the e-commerce retailer has, assuming that the supply chains and the speed with which you get the gear to the customer is similar?
But you create something that is slightly unique, and that's why there are about 5 or 6 or 7 retail propositions on the high street that actually work and will survive, because you go there for a reason. Actually, there are very few.
Isn't the edge just convenience? I mean, I don't have to walk in a store. I think we forget that his daughter, you know, walking in stores is almost somewhat foreign to her. And so I think we put our own mindset of how we've lived our lives. But again, I think there's an entire generation that's saying, why would I ever go to a corner store to get toothpaste when I could just show up at my door?
But if you
So that daughter last weekend was shopping on the main street with her grandmother for fashion, because it was a social experience. It was something to, it was a way to spend the afternoon together. There's nothing emotionally gratifying about going to Boots or its equivalent in any country in the world. And what they're selling is commoditized. But
Sorry, Stefano Pacina, if you're watching this.
but to go somewhere with particularly for women, it's absolutely clearly demonstrated, and I'm sure you guys have the data, that side of the lineup here, shopping in a way that's enjoyable with people whom you have a relationship with, that's a shared experience, that's a grounding, that's a formative logic.
But it's also thinking slightly beyond that in terms of why you're going to create the reason to come back. You know, the reason we put a cobbler in our new shoe heaven was, yes, it was a service, but every month the girls get their Louboutins re-redded. So they come back every month and they walk by the Louboutin shop. You know, this is, and it's how do you engage those? And if you think across the categories, particularly for people, there are lots of ways. For us, our pharmacy, a massive business. Why? The person comes every month for their prescription. And how do you then engage them, and what are your adjacencies? And the great thing about what we do is, because we have 82% visibility of our customer, our adjacencies are absolutely perfect. Not because we're brilliant, but because the customer tells me in their basket what else they are buying. And we put those products next to those by chance. And the customer loves it because they see all of their beautiful products all in a line. So it's using data, but it's then how do you get this frequency and how do you get that person to come back every month for a reason? And if you think outside of the box to put together your range of services that may not actually fit, you can do it because that person, actually I want to come there because of that uniqueness.
So I'll try to give you a new paradigm of retail. The woman has spent 50% of the household, or controls the expenditure of 50% of the household spending in a fraction of the time it used to take, from a mobile device, from the children's sports match, from the train, wherever it is. So she now has a lot more time, less money in her pocket, and she's going to be much more demanding about the quality of experience that she's going to pursue during the time she's going to spend away from being online. Because actually, the other thing that's true for us in terms of DNA, we are programmed, our generations, maybe 100 generations from now, we won't need to talk to other people, we won't need to think and see other people, but we're programmed to be social, and we're programmed to search out experience. And the new paradigm is that there's a fight for less money over more time in the physical channel of distribution, which is ultimately experiential.
I wanted to get a property person's perspective on all this from you. I mean, obviously here in the UK we have this sort of culture of upward-only rent reviews. the property sector as a whole seems very, very unresponsive to what is going on in retail at times.
It's, yes, but in a way it's not the property sector because they're a service provider. Whom are they serving? Brands or retailers, institutional investors. The reality is that these changes take longer to occur than people prophesize, and then they happen much more abruptly than people assume. So Woolworths is there, and it's there, and it's there in the UK, and everyone expects it to die, but it's still there, and then one day it vaporizes. And you're going to see that as a recurrent theme. Michael understands the consumer, and what he's outlined, I believe, is correct, and the real estate or the property outcome is going to reflect how the consumer votes with her spending, with her pocketbook. So I think there's going to be an incredible gutting out of non-core real estate, core being defined by locations where that woman wants to go. And there will be a second activity in real estate which will work, locations which are extremely convenient, but there isn't the need for too many of those in most settings.
I remember going back into because I've done this for far too long. When you see a recession, you knew exactly the cities that were going to come out because the stores closed, you had vacant lots. Now, that's not going to now be a recession, that's going to be a permanent feature. And a lot of the time we were covered, I think the last time I did this, we were covered it by the pub companies and amusement arcades, where we offloaded a lot of our properties onto all of the pub chains because they wanted to come into the high street, the Wetherspoons, etc. There's nobody there waiting at the wings. So as I say, if you go back to the 70s, you can predict the devastation and where it's going to hit, and they will not recover.
This is essentially a government policy issue because if you think about who owns all those buildings that will be empty, it's widows and orphans because it's insurance companies, pension funds. And if you think that the property sector is behind, try the civil service sector and the elected politicians. They're looking at tomorrow, they're not looking out 5 years. And all of the incentives, there's a lot of eyewash, right? A lot of painting of dreams, but there's no serious work being done to anticipate this, and it's going to be a mess.
Bonin, we haven't really talked a lot about grocery retail in particular. I just wonder whether you could share some of your perspectives on how you see grocery retailing going.
Yeah, of course. So, online grocery retail will be 3 to 10%. That's what the estimate is, BCG or Bain or McKinsey. But more importantly, it'll be close to 50% of the growth of grocery companies. And so that makes it a really important segment, whether it's a small percentage of revenue. I think that the challenge right now is, it all goes back to, I think, experience. So the newer players, the Boxed of the world, which are going after Costco, when you go through their app experience, it's beautiful. It's amazing because they're not starting with any legacy technology. They're starting as a mobile-first retailer. And so the mobile mom, and we used to talk about the millennial mom, and I think it put us in the wrong mindset because it made us just think, oh, it's just a younger generation mom that's always shopped like she has. Whereas now, we talk about the mobile mom because that is somebody who's taken back the time that the retail store used to take from her. And she's sitting at the ballpark and, and now she wants an amazing experience. And so what I worry about is, are the traditional retailers that are trying to get into e-commerce in a bigger way, do they actually have the horsepower to create the right experience that mom's going to shop? And then when you look at these companies, their projections of their business model are $1 billion by 2017. I mean, they see the growth that mobile-first companies have taken off. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenge. And then I think, I think Michael said it best, which is we now have to figure out actually in offline retail, how do we do that even better? Because what we can't do is let the migratory behavior, and that's, I think the hardest challenge we have is we always want to say, is it incremental, is it incremental, is it incremental? Well, it doesn't matter because the consumer's going there. So we have to figure out how to make that experience in store and offline different. But my big concern is, do our traditional retailers have the horsepower to create experiences for this new shopping paradigm?
Do you see anyone who's succeeding in that? I won't ask you who's doing it badly.
Well, I just encourage you to open up an app from any of these guys and look at that versus somebody like a Boxed, or look at that versus the experience of Uber. And I know that's a big challenge here, but at the end of the day, there's nobody who really loves the taxi experience in any city. And when you think about the experience, and I'm treading very thinly here, I understand, but when you think about the ability to take open an app, hit a button to have a car come directly to you and see exactly what time it's going to be, game over, absolutely. Game over. And when you look at cities like India, where you have 20 million cars, there might never be another car bought there because of services like Uber are going to change transportation. That asset sits there, you drive it twice a day, and that asset sits there. Now it can be redistributed. So I guess to answer your question, I don't think that a lot of the traditional folks have yet the mindset around understanding that experience from a mobile first. So there's still a large gap between the shopping experiences.
I think the other wild card here is the Internet of Things. Particularly for groceries. So
Dash buttons.
So take Amazon Dash, and I mean, at the end of the day, I suspect most people's grocery shop is pretty much the same week on week. So why have to do it at all? So if people we've been talking about smart fridges and so on for a very, very long time, but I'm pretty sure that the technology will be there as this pervades into the home. So it will order for you and it'll just arrive without you having to do it. So you don't actually have to go into the shop at all. Now, the interesting thing that I feel slightly sad about is that you kind of lose is the serendipity of shopping. So when I go grocery shopping, I don't love the experience, but I do end up buying a whole bunch of stuff I didn't realize I wanted.
But not just serendipity. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you over.
Yeah, please.
But impulse. So if you
what I
think
mean.
about us,
That's
we're
what I
an
mean.
impulse shopper. That's the hardest challenge that we have in e-com.
Exactly.
150 years ago, we built technology, which were wire racks that allows you to put gum and chocolate at the front of the store. Now we have to rebuild real technology that allows us to drive impulse behavior, and that's the hardest challenge.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean.
But the other point as well is the behaviour is all there in terms of the impulse is removed because they've screened and done their research before they've even started, even in the physical world. Now, our Chinese shopper, 75 to 80% is actually pre-planned with a list supported by folders, supported by prices, and they walk in. So trying to get them to do an add-on sale is hugely difficult because they've researched everything they singularly
That might
want.
be something to do with your price points, Michael.
Nothing at all to do with our prices.
No, it's actually done not just on the research. They're buying for family and friends.
Correct.
So they're essentially the new distribution mechanism, if you think about it that way. But they're coming to Michael because they can go home, not just with the goods, but with the experience, and they're transmitting some of the magic of that experience. If you go to one of our villages, you will see sometimes example of Chinese family with the man will be standing there. It's always the man surrounded by 10 bags from the same store, because every package home has to have its separate bag and a separate receipt, not to prove the price, but to authenticate the experience. So it's not just the item. Turns out they could buy the item online and have it shipped. But this is about theater of retail is in the end about creating memories. How to make Oreo central to a memory of youth, of celebration, of happiness. That's where branding starts to get interesting.
But just the one thing as well is this has got to be counterpoint is the governance of the web in terms of counterfeiting and to make sure that people have got confidence in the digital economy. At the moment, there's a large movement away from, particularly in premium priced products, about authenticity. And why will the Chinese come to us and even play the right price? But it's because they know that that's absolutely an authentic product. And the volume of product that's now appearing on the web, which is unauthentic, being charged for an authentic product, is going to be a real destroyer of confidence. Because as soon as they get it, they've got no recourse because of safe harbour provisions. So and going back in terms of, there has to be a rethink of legislation to make people responsible and have a duty of care to customer in these environments. At the moment, there is no duty of care to the customer in these environments.
That's a pretty powerful advert for traditional retailers.
Look at me.
Nicely sidestep there.
Well, no, I think we face some of those challenges even in traditional retail, though. Depends on what market you're in. So I think that, but I do think it comes back to what is the brand experience. And I think one of the challenges that we have when you look at an Amazon marketplace, for example, is third-party providers. So third-party providers are buying our product on discount and reselling it. And so we have to figure out how do we now control, because when they call to complain about the product was broken when it was shipped to them, that call comes to us, but we don't actually control the supply chain that got it to them. And so now we have to figure out how do we understand all of those, every single one of those aspects, and how do we begin to, we can't stop it, so how do we begin to put pieces in place so that we make the consumer experience better? But the actual interesting thing about that, third-party providers, is that because they're able to fulfill, and some of them will buy, you know, all 9 flavors of wheat thins, put it together, and that's a combination pack. But because they're actually rearranging our portfolio differently, we're actually learning what the consumer wants, because sometimes those products are selling even better than us. So it's actually created a distributed knowledge base for us. So it comes with its challenges as well. So.
Yeah, are the risks to your brand equity any greater in an e-commerce environment than in a physical environment? I mean, if I'm Sainsbury's selling bottles of London Pride at £3 for a fiver, I mean, that trashes the brewer's brand equity to an extent, and he's got no control over that.
Yeah, I think I think the online channel actually creates more power for us to build brand than it actually challenges the brand. And so when I look at social commerce or the opportunities that lie within that and what we've done with the Oreo brand, I mean, digital has transformed the Oreo brand. And so I actually think that there's greater upside than there is downside, to be perfectly honest.
Well, yeah, we've got 7 minutes or so left. Let's have some questions from the audience. If you'd be so kind as to say who you are as well, please, sir.
Hi, Bonin. I'm an investor for a family office. I'd be curious to know your view on online grocery, Ocado in particular, winner or bankrupt?
Who's going to take that one?
They're a large customer of ours. So, but I think that there's challenges with click and collect, and I think you know, they have to continue to understand that model. And to be quite frank with you, I actually think that as their partner, we have to help as well.
So there's a professor at Harvard Business School who says they're ahead of the U.S. Online grocery distributors in terms of their algorithms and infrastructure. But what I would always be interested in, I'm not a grocery expert, is the disrupting energy that's coming in from a new technological platform or new approach. We talked before about the conversion of established retailers. Walmart spent a lot of money, set up in Silicon Valley, tried to have a pure online approach, and it didn't work at all. Ocado is the disruptor today, but who's coming behind them and why? And it could be somebody funded by a competitor or by someone in the chain of control of product and experience.
Or it could be Uber. I mean, what Uber is beginning to experiment with in terms of doing deliveries, I think is also extremely interesting. So essentially, if you have companies like that saying, we're going to get into the delivery marketplace, and there's a fantastic article by Bill Gurley, I'd recommend people read, about the economics of Uber. If you look at Uber just as a taxi company, its valuation makes no sense at all. If you look at it as a taxi company, a delivery company, a global company, self-driving cars, it's cheap. So it's actually a very interesting thing about how do you frame the company.
Yeah. So you posed a question, sir. What do you think?
On Ocado? The scant understanding I have at present, just because somebody mentioned the idea to me, is that it's they are far more efficient fulfillment-wise than all the dark stores that Tesco's and the others have, so that's very interesting. The SKUs, they've got 100,000 versus 30, 40,000 for the others, so all that looks very interesting, but they don't make money, and I don't know how they will make money, and I'd like to understand. But on the other hand, I look at the tailwind that it's still 5% of the 175 billion or so that's online grocery retail in the UK. So that 5% is becoming 50% in the next 15, 20 years. They ought to be making money, and therefore it looks good, but they could go bust before they get there. And you guys are experts, so how?
TaskRabbit, anybody know TaskRabbit?
Yeah. No.
Right. So today you want groceries in the US, you just do it online through TaskRabbit. Somebody goes to the store, collects it for you, delivers it to your house, and that's the Uber solution. Glam Squad, anybody know Glam Squad?
Instacart.
Going to get it delivered within an hour, And that's the other dynamic over here, which is people want it a lot quicker. You know, they're not prepared to wait at home between 3 and 5 when Ocado are going to deliver. They want to find other ways to do it. I mean, I read a really interesting thing the other day about a company that's trying to say, you know, forget about how it works, but essentially we'll put it in the boot of your car if your car's parked outside your house. You know, so there are all kinds of strange things happening right now.
There's a gentleman over there who's keen to.
Andy Russman, CEO of Alchemy Global. Curious about the use of beacon technologies now and how you're utilizing that for the in-store experience for the consumer.
We've refused to use it because we found it intrusive on the customer. If somebody greeted me when I went in a store with an email message telling me I was going to shop, I would think, no, thank you, and I would actually turn straight back out.
We have a similar view. It's great in theory, but in practice, you're getting pinged, as I mentioned before, constantly, incessantly, and it is. I know people who get fed up with just the daily sale, right? With the Guild Group or the Living Social, and that's scheduled on time, and they find that oppressive. So I think it's got a lot less. The way it's conceived today, I think it has a lot less potential than mathematically one might extrapolate.
We've seen success with it. So we rolled out on the back of POS. We have one of the largest beacon networks and one of the retailers in the US on the back of POS. But I think the key is we put it inside of an existing shopping app. So people had expectations that they were going to deliver it. The tough thing will be what happens, this is in the cracker aisle, what happens when every single cracker wants to ping a person? So then becomes an issue. When it's just us, we can control the experience, but when everybody wants to do it, then what is it? So I think at scale, it has challenges. Now, in small, limited pilots, we've seen success.
I mean, we did it with McDonald's, for instance, and again, it comes to training the consumer. So if you go into McDonald's, most people go into McDonald's, order the same thing all the time. So it's actually incredibly useful for them to be able to go in, for the beacon to pick up who they are, and for their order effectively to be recorded so they can go straight up and pick up what they want without having to order it. So that has a real utility. And I think that's one of the other issues that people need to think about. What is the real utility of what we're doing? The example I like to use is when Tesco first launched their app, one of the key things was, oh, we're going to put the club card on the app. But when I shop, I've got my wallet out already to pay. It's actually very easy for me to take my club card out and give it to them. If I have to take out my phone, switch on my phone, find the app, scan the card, it's much worse, the experience. So you've got to really think through what is the utility I'm really providing here.
Okay, there's a gentleman over there. No? Okay. Any more for any more? We've got about 90 seconds left. Sir.
Do you not think that, from a social point of view, governments won't let high streets to become dead, and so they'll find some way of levelling the playing field?
There's a wonderful book called The End of Power by a scholar named Moises Naim. And the premise, I reduce it to this book conversation, is that technology has marginalized the impact and the influence of traditional power structures, such as government. And so it doesn't really matter what government wants to do, because they used to have the bully pulpit and they used to have control of levers that they don't anymore. And to the extent that power, the person or the group in power wants to do something, and people vote online, surveys, polls, protests. It happens already in major cities. So I think that's the trend. And I think the other thing is government is so slow and so simplistic. This is not meant to be a pure criticism of government. I'm just saying the way they're operating versus the agility and speed of the world around them. They're always looking to close the door after the horse is bolted.
But you can't keep a dinosaur in a cage. And that's effectively what we're saying. Effectively, the consumer no longer wants this. And therefore, for the government to say, well, you may wish to shop online, but you're going to have to come to Coventry every 3 days to do it. That's what we're actually saying. So the government's got no ability here.
So London now has this proposed reg where if I want to get an Uber car and it's sitting next to me, I have to wait 5 minutes before it can tell me it's there. Now I, as a voter, as a consumer, you'll see me voting against anybody who's in favor of that proposition, because it's impeding my ability just to live my daily life.
Okay, folks, we are out of time. Thank you very much. If you could thank our panelists, Bonin, Ajay, Scott, and Michael. Thank you. Great stuff. Terrific.